All right, so we are back.
Yeah.
The chair lice followers of TJump. How's it going, Biscuit? How are you doing?
Man, things are good. Things are good. You should. I saw that little intro that you had, which is dope. But you should really have House of Pain because they have a song called Jump, like that. You know that jump around, jump up,
Yep.
and your last name is Jump. Like if you could get the rights to that just for the intro, that would be amazing.
Yes, unfortunately, that costs money.
Right. They're not going to give it to you for free at all.
So Biscuit has just volunteered to buy the rights to the song for this YouTube channel. I appreciate that, Biscuit.
I'll put in. If your fans put in, I'll put in too. I think all of us would have to pay like how many subscribers you got, bro? If we all paid $1, you could get the rights.
Sure. Probably just gonna have to steal it, just like put a version on and then just change it, like change the speed or something so the algorithm can't recognize it, then it's fine.
Right. And the thing is, like, if you're small enough, they won't even recognize. They get that song gets used so much illegally, they won't even recognize it. And by the time they do, you'll have made enough money to pay whatever fee.
Wish that's how it works. I think Bear, one of the big atheists, uses a bear icon which he didn't own, and he became like really big, like 100,000 subscribers. And the people who owned the rights to the bear flagged every one of his videos, got his channel completely terminated.
What?
Yeah.
Off of an icon?
Yeah, because it was his, like, he was doing all those like Armored Skeptic things where it's his main character that he does, and so it's in every one of his videos.
Right.
So yeah, they owned the bear and they took the bear, and now his channel, he had to make a new channel, start from nothing.
Let me ask you something. Do you believe in the multiverse or the many world interpretations in physics, or?
I think the multiverse is more plausible than most of the other ones. I don't really believe it, but I think it's more plausible than like a god or most of the other hypotheses.
So in your mind, in the multiverse, is there an alternate TJump and an alternate Biscuit?
Yeah.
Right. So there is a universe where I converted TJump.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And there is a universe where Biscuit sent all of his money to TJump's bank account. And
That's
those are probably
true.
the
We're
same
not
universe.
in that one though. That's not the actual universe. That's not the that's a possible world, but that's not the actual world. The actual world, as your headline says, Biscuit converts TJump.
Well, I think in that universe is the same one you were talking about, where Biscuit converts TJump, is the same one where he sends all his money to TJump. I think that's an effective strategy.
Is that what can your soul be bought?
Yes. Yes. My Patreon has a convert to Christianity number. It's $1 million a month.
Sheldrake, I think Rupert Sheldrake actually conducted experiments where atheists refused to sell their souls. Like he wrote it down, like he wrote down on a piece of paper, I hereby sell my soul. And like a bunch of atheists, and it was real money. Like if you were to sign this contract, he would give you real money. And people were like, yo, I'm not signing that. Like,
well, I think
people
it was like
were just
$50. So like if you bumped it up to like $5,000, people would do it in a second. But like for $50, like meh.
But do you not believe in the soul enough to sell it for $1? If someone's like, yo, I'll give you $1 if you sign this thing saying I sell my soul, you know, like if that's authentic disbelief. But people wouldn't even do it for $50.
Yeah, I think it's the intuition thing. Like the Pascal's wager does the probabilities. Like, is the potential loss greater than the potential gain? And so you have to weigh it against what you can possibly accomplish. So even if it's just hypothetical, if it isn't enough to justify the risk of eternal suffering or whatever, then it justifiably emotionally you wouldn't do it. So if you bumped up the number to $5,000, people would all do it.
It's crazy to think that God would honor that contract, though. Like you're just an amazing person throughout your whole life. You do everything you can for the poor. You're completely altruistic, and then but there was that time that you sold your soul for $1, like back in college for some drunken experiment, and that God would honor that contract and say, "Look, you did all this great stuff, but listen, you sold your soul, and I have to abide by those terms."
You're sitting there at the pearly gates and God's reading your list. Oh, you're such a good person. You and Gandhi are up there like super kind. Like, oh, but there was this one time you sold your soul. It seems like it's owned property of Rupert Sheldrake. So I'm going to have to send you to wherever he is.
That's crazy, bro. What's up with your hair? Why'd you do that?
10,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel is a subscriber goal.
Legit. How have the females responded? Good?
More positively, yes.
Really?
Yeah.
That's legit, bro.
So it's more
That's
like
a bold statement.
It seems like if you do things that make you stand out, then they're more responsive. They're more willing to talk to you and stuff like that because you're interesting, even if it isn't.
Phenomenon is called peacocking. It ends at marriage.
Yeah. So gotten more conversations with this hair than with my previous hair.
What you been studying recently? I've heard you talk about Nima Arkani Hamed. I've been watching your videos and
I studied him a while ago. He was the amplituhedron guy. Recently, I've been studying starting nonprofits, legal ownership of apartment buildings for nonprofits, how to combine churches with nonprofits. I found that there was one church that does do that and gives housing for people in St. Louis. I found a local organization that does low-income housing. It's called the Noah Fund, Noah something Fund, and Aon, which are nonprofits that own apartment buildings, and they own like 1,100 units or something, and they provide them at affordable costs. And I've been trying to research into all the processes and doing that so I can work on starting my own church and doing that, the atheist church designed to build apartment buildings and keep them at low costs, and then from the income that provides, establish a church facility to do these kinds of conversations and TED Talks and debates and that kind of stuff. So that's what I've been researching into recently. I also signed up as a non-degree seeking student at the U. So probably going to take a few courses there again. That's what I've been doing.
You know, I respect you for that, bro. Like, and you and I were talking, I think in our last, the last time I was on here, about that atheist church and everything. And here's how I convert you, as a matter of fact. What would you say if someone were to ask you what the gospel is? If someone were to say, TJump, pretend that you're a Christian and share the gospel with me, what would you say?
I believe that is the one where a zombie Jew died and resurrected, and now we have to eat of his skin, and because a rib woman ate from a magical tree because of a talking snake. I believe that is that the gospel?
That is not the gospel. that you get an F on your gospel essay. That was terrible.
I disagree. Like, that one would get me an A in freaking Bible college.
Like, it's a crazy question, bro, because you're not on Clubhouse as often as I wish you were. But I was in the Ask a Christian room, and I asked them, like, what is the gospel? And a lot of people said, listen, the gospel is Jesus died and resurrected to save you from your sins. That's the gospel. But what's interesting is when I read the Gospels, the disciples were always confused about what Jesus was talking about when he mentioned the resurrection. They never understood it. It was always unclear. Peter even got to the point where he rebuked Jesus. Where he said, you're not going to die on a cross. What are you talking about? And Jesus had to rebuke Peter back and say, get behind me, Satan. You're an offense to me. You don't understand the things of God, right? So whenever Jesus talked about the resurrection, which was decidedly rare, certainly more rare than talking about doing for the poor and, taking in the widow and giving water to, children who are thirsty, right? And so I started to compile this list of things that Jesus actually said about what it meant to be saved and what his ministry was actually about. And then, like, John 21:15, he says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, I love you. He says, feed my lambs. He repeats, Peter, do you love me? And Peter's like, yes, I love you. He says, then feed my lambs. Then Jesus repeats the third time, Peter, do you love me? And Peter gets offended. He's like, I love you. And Jesus says, then feed my lambs. And that adding of emphasis is Jesus saying, this is what's principally important to me, right? And I agree. I'm in this space right now where I'm agreeing with Bart Ehrman about this kind of disagreement that exists between the apostle Paul's interpretation of what the gospel is and Jesus's interpretation of what the gospel is. Have you heard of this before?
Yeah, but what do you mean when Jesus says feed my lambs? What do you think Jesus means by that?
I think he means the thing that he's been talking about the entire time is like, blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Well, I mean,
Here is
feed
your
them,
pure and
feed them
faultless
with
religion.
what? Does he mean feed them with food, or feed them with like teaching resurrection, or teaching about God stuff? What does he mean by feed them?
I think literally feeding them, like literally doing for them. Like he says, and the reason I think this is because Jesus said, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me water. When I was in prison, you visited me. And he said, they'll say unto me, when did we see you hungry and feed you? When were you thirsty and we gave you something to drink? And he said, whenever you did it for the least of these, you did it for me. Right. And I think that was principal to his message, you know. And the response that I get from certain Christians, and not everybody, but certain Christians that believe that the death and resurrection is fundamental to Christianity, they are offended by that, and they say, so you mean that to be a Christian, all you have to do is to be a good person? But Jesus was very interested in goodness. He didn't trivialize it. Because when the rich ruler said to Jesus, good teacher, what do I have to do to be saved? Jesus said, why do you call me good? There's only one good, and that's God, right? Jesus didn't trivialize good. He took it very seriously. So to be good is to be Christian. And Jesus, it's to be a Christ follower in the estimation of Jesus, I think. And so there's nowhere where, Jesus is asked about salvation or the kingdom of God where he says, in order to enter it, you have to believe that I'm going to die and resurrect. And so I'm kind of in a weird space right now with respect to how I feel about what it actually means to be a Christian. And I'm on a similar journey to the one that you're on. My wife and I live in a beautiful area surrounded by trees, but we have lots of homeless people, and a lot of people who are on drugs. So when you see people who are homeless, a lot of times they'll be in the throes of like this drug-induced
high.
Yeah, it's like it's almost like a drug-induced paranoia or a psychosis. You know what I'm saying? And there was this guy, who was just kicking it on my property. He was shirtless, sitting on the ground, talking to himself. And I went up there and engaged in conversation with him. Eventually, I had to have him leave the property. But my wife and I are, deciding to go to city councils and to talk about what can be done about, addressing these issues. And
that's a waste of time.
You think city councils are a waste of time?
Yeah,
the thing is, almost everybody, more than half of the people on the city council in Spokane, Washington, are new. They just joined the council in 2022, which means, and I've only been here for 2 years, like they've been doing such a bad job that they're being replaced on a regular basis. I don't know where the funding is going.
Well, so the most effective council person who I've seen who has actually made change by going up to a council is Alex Stein. Like, oh my God, he has done an amazing job. He goes to the Dallas council representative public space, and he just trolls. He just goes full whack job, liberal, Republican, crazy person, and he just does complete jokes, making a silly of himself. And he's got 100,000 subscribers on YouTube specifically because that, and he was put on Fox News with Tucker Carlson because he did that, and it's the funniest thing ever. Yes. Oh my God, I love the guy. He's absolutely hilarious. But
wait, what's this guy's name?
Alex Stein, Primetime 99. So I've debated him a few times. He used to have he was small channel, smaller than I was, but he went on to the state capitol meetings where it was public, and he started rapping, just doing full Wicca. He looks like a baby Tucker Carlson, and he started rapping, and he dressed up as a nurse and pretended that he was getting COVID, and he's done all kinds of just skits where it's obvious he's pranking them. And because his story is that he wasn't being listened to. He tried to go up seriously. Nobody listened to him. Never made a difference. Just like every student or every Capitol Hill meeting, no one gives a shit what anybody says when you're there. But when he started making jokes, people started paying attention. The liberals started to take him seriously as like an actual representative of liberty. He's not. He's super conservative, but and because of that, when they started taking him seriously because of his super overblown emotional stuff, that's when Tucker Carlson had him on, because he's like, wow, people are actually listening to you and paying attention because of all the crazy stuff you do. And so if you want to be effective at a Capitol Hill meeting, go the Alex Stein route.
Bro, I think I've seen like the going insane for Ukraine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, because I'm looking him up right now, and I've seen like he's a meme. He's a popular meme now.
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I would
So
say
you
that
don't think
the
that going to city council meetings and you think that that's a waste of time? That they're what you
completely.
think that they're not interested?
It's not
Do you think
about
they're not like really interested in change, or do you think they're just powerless?
it's more about, in order for them to be interested, you have to convince a significant enough of percentage of the voter base. And so they'd have to believe that what you're saying represents a large enough population in the people who vote for them in order to encourage them to actually do anything, which is not what you're going to do by going to city council meetings and having one person represent a particular idea. R.N. Ra's been doing this for a long time with the Texas Education Board. Never made any change at all. The better way to make change is like trying to do what I'm doing. Start a church, start a organization to provide housing or something and get funding, because there's lots of organizations that'll give you funding for these kind of enterprises. So if you actually are the change that you want to see in the world, that's a better way to actually help people than to petition politicians because they're useless idiots. So yeah, if you want to actually try to help people, that's the way to do it. Start a church, provide housing. There's a
Do
few
you
few
have somewhere
examples.
where people can give to what you're trying to do?
Right now, it's just my YouTube channel. That's all I got. I did want to. I'm probably going to start a GoFundMe. I'm going to present my plan to the Minnesota Atheists next month, and I'm going to fly to the American Atheists conference in a week and hopefully present it to them there. And if I get enough interest, then I'll definitely start like a GoFundMe to try and do this for sure. And I definitely want to partner with churches, Christian churches, to do the same thing, because I think helping people is more important than any type of ideological differences. So I want to build a large enough community of both atheists, secular people, and Christians and Jews and whatever religion to start to provide a significant amount of housing for people around the U.S. by this means if we can.
What do you think about? Are you familiar with Michael Schellenberger's work? Michael Schellenberger, he's been on Joe Rogan a couple times. He wrote a popular book called San Francisco, and he talks about open air drug markets and how a lot of what's presumed to be a homelessness problem is actually a drug addict problem and requires psychological help as what instead of just homes. Right, a lot of people who are like living in tent cities are there because their addiction has exhausted their resources. So they have families that are out there that are just not willing to deal with them anymore because of the drugs that they're addicted to, and a lot of times these shelters won't allow them to maintain their addictions, or these shelters won't allow them beds as long if they're in a if they're still high, if they undergo psychosis as an amount of as a result of their drug addictions, and so it becomes kind of a complicated problem,
Yeah.
where it's like, do you take away the sticks and just give the carrots, right? Where it's like, will it make a substantial difference just providing housing for people who need psychological help because of addictions, and how do you handle that in a way that still honors the dignity of these folks, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's also a problem. Like providing housing for very low income people is definitely an issue. My target is more like closer to the middle class. So I want mine isn't specifically for super low income. To do that, you do Section 8 housing is the best way to help them with housing issues. But if you want to help them psychologically, um, I think it was Reagan who abolished all the different psych wards and turned them into police, and that was the biggest contributor to the increase in the homelessness problem. So I do think that providing psych wards and people to help with those is definitely a major issue that was hurt by the Republican Party in the Reagan era. And there has been evidence that we can improve it by doing things like having more psych wards and having the drug centers where people can take drugs in a safe environment. And if they can get safe drugs, that'll make the issue less bad in a lot of ways. So there's lots of ways to address that issue for sure. Um, the biggest one would definitely be the allowing them to wean off of their addiction by giving them access to drugs that aren't corrupted by other things that they're going to do significant damage to their body, while also providing them with some amount of help. And so like one of the big statistics that I've seen is that these drug facilities that are in Canada and Australia and other places, there are 0 drug deaths ever from any of them. No one's ever overdosed and died in any of them ever in the world. And there's millions of people who've used them. And so the success rate for these is 100%. They have a 100% success rate to prevent deaths and fatal overdoses. And so these facilities offer a very successful means to help people that isn't there in countries that don't have them. Kind of like the abstinence only education is a completely failed methodology to teach kids about safe sex, because in countries that are in states that have abstinence only, they have higher teen pregnancy rates, higher STD rates, higher out of wedlock pregnancy rates. It's just a failed methodology. And the same thing applies here to drugs, that when you don't educate people or give people the opportunity to responsibly or learn how to responsibly do the thing because of some kind of paranoia that you're enabling them or that you're promoting some kind of immorality, it leads to worse consequences than the people who actually do allow for it to some extent and then teach how to do it responsibly.
Yeah, for sure. So where do you, let me ask you this. James chapter 2 says, here is your pure and faultless religion before God. Here is your pure and faultless religion before God, to extend the hand to the widow and to help the poor, and to not become something by the world, to not become hold on one second. Okay, there you go. Oh yeah, so he goes even further. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And that's the end of the chapter. That's not out of context, right? That after he says this, it's on to a new concept. So if that's true, that religion that God the Father accepts as pure and faultless is to look after orphans and widows in their distress, to keep oneself from being polluted by the world, which is very consistent with what Jesus's major message is. Why aren't you a Christian?
So my interpretation of much of the Bible is this: that deeds aren't enough, good works aren't enough, and that you need to believe and accept God as or Jesus as your savior in order to get into heaven. If you don't do that, then the works will never be enough and they won't matter. And I think that's a big part of most Christians. I agree with, I think your interpretation is a more moral interpretation. I think it's a better one. And I think same with progressive Christianity. I think it's a better interpretation. But I think the vast majority of Christians interpret Christianity to being Jesus comes first, not works come first. And that if you do only good works or only focus on helping people, then you're not doing enough. And that there's this thing of many places in the Bible it says don't get corrupted by this world or obsessed with the things in this world because they don't really matter. What matters is the afterlife or whatever. And to get the afterlife, you need to spread Jesus. And so evangelism is not about helping people. It's about helping people to live better lives. It's about providing them the message of Jesus so that they can save their souls. And so you shouldn't worry about this life. This life doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. And so helping them, like Mother Teresa was, her goal was not to eliminate pain. Her goal was she specifically said pain was a good thing because it brought people to Jesus. And I think that's what I think is a problem in Christianity. I think that what you're saying is a more moral doctrine that we should focus on is actually helping people and benefiting their lives, and I don't really care about the message of Jesus at all.
For sure, for sure. You know, there's a guy named Mike Safi. Uh, and shout out to him. He's a friend of mine who's on Clubhouse, and he kind of stressed this point too. He happens to be an atheist, but he and I were having a conversation, and you know, he was like, doesn't, according to Christianity, doesn't the devil believe that Jesus died and resurrected? Doesn't the devil believe that Jesus is God? Like when Jesus was casting out demons, the demons called him Son of God. You know, they acknowledged him in that way. And in that same chapter in Peter, he says in verse 19, you believe that there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. You foolish person. Do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did? It's like, so I think that it's stressing the point, you know, that you kind of you're alluding to. And I don't know, for me, I'm just kind of in this area mentally and in my faith, that it was a lot more simple than we're making it. And I'm also kind of reading some books right now about how modernism changed religion from what it used to be, from something that was more works focused to something that's more focused on your belief set and having a dogmatic structure of things that you have to believe. And that buffeting against modernism was the scientific community, right? You know, even Immanuel Kant thought that the scientific community was kind of pushing religion out, and a lot of Kant's critiques were built out of a desire to rescue the faith from that scientific encroachment. And so I think that what you have in the contemporary church, there's some residue of that. There's some residue of, you know, we have to believe this and stand on these beliefs, and these beliefs are important because from the outside world, they're attacking these beliefs. And so we have to teach you that, you know, this is true, and that your salvation depends on you believing that these facts are true. And that's not what it was supposed to be. I don't see that as being built into it.
Yeah, I think I would definitely agree. I think there's been changes in Christianity over time. I think that, like, at one point, the way to get into heaven was to give money to the church. That was, if you donate your cash to the church a sufficient amount, they give you access to heaven for your soul. And
Indulgences too, right?
yeah, yeah. So it seems like, as because the Bible, there's quite a bit there that can be interpreted in many different ways. People have interpreted it in ways that fit their moral framework across time. And the moral framework of all of society has been changing across time. I think it's been improving, moral progress. And so the original ways of interpreting the Bible seem to be more based on the social needs of the time, which were definitely works more than the just belief system thing. Like, you didn't even have to know how to read the Bible. It was in Latin. You couldn't read it. Most people couldn't read, didn't matter. And so the things that are now seen as required to get into heaven are more based on the cultural ideology of the people who are the vast majority of Christians. And that's really changing more recently with progressive Christianity and kind of the Christianity you're espousing, which is more moral, because it's aligning itself with the more moral framework of today's society, which I think is a good thing. But I totally agree that it definitely was very different in the past than the way it is now. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. But not to drastically change the subject, but I'm going to drastically change the subject. um, to go back, because I was interested in what you were saying about Nima Arkani Hamed, and you know, I listened to his lecture called "Space Time is Doomed." And he says it's not possible, even in principle, to give operational meaning to space-time anymore.
Yeah.
What is the consequence of that to you, my friend, on a worldview level? What are the consequences of that? He says space-time must dissolve into more fundamental structures. I used to be, in my ignorance, and I still am ignorant, I'm by no means a physicist or anything close. I used to think that, oh, you know, there used to be no space-time. 13.7 billion years ago, and then classical space-time emerged, out of that, and now we really have space-time. That's not the contemporary high energy physics perspective. What does that mean to you?
That it's made of something else. Like, I think that's the consensus in physics. I don't think it has any consequences other than the fact that our intuitions don't accurately map onto things outside of our known fields that we interact with, which is already known. Like, we already know that our intuitions are garbage at assessing anything at the quantum level, like particle wave duality, entanglement, the randomness decay of an atom. Our intuitions tell us really nothing once we get to that level because they're built on our level of interaction at the micro level or macro level. But I don't think there's anything further that's a really problem for. It just means that the things that we experience as space-time are emergent from other things, and that seems fine to me. I don't see what consequences that could have.
Well, I mean, it made me more sympathetic to the interface theory of perception, posited and championed by Donald Hoffman, where he says that essentially space-time is a data compression tool for localized creatures like ourselves, that essentially evolution gave us space and time so that we could achieve goals. This perception of present, past, and future, and converting future events to past events is this goal setting mechanism that we've evolved to perceive. So it's not fundamental, it's not real, but it's something that we need to take seriously, though not literally.
Well, I think it's still literally real. It's just an emergent thing. So, like waves aren't fundamental. Waves are an emergent property of changes in pressure in water. So obviously we can't say that waves are the most fundamental thing in the universe, but they're still there. They're still a real thing that does stuff. They're just caused by something else that's more fundamental. It's kind of like chemistry is a subset of physics, but that doesn't mean chemistry isn't real. Chemistry is obviously real. So space-time is just like chemistry. It's a result of more fundamental things, and if you knew the more fundamental things, then you could know all of the chemistry. But it's still there. There's still chemical interactions.
So a wave, in my understanding, is more like an Aristotelian potentia. It's like potential. It's not. It's more like a concept than matter.
Sort of, yes. I mean, but that information is itself physical. Information is a physical thing, and so the wave and what it represents, the physical medium that it exists in, is unknown, but it isn't purely abstract. Like, they don't exist in minds. Nobody thinks that waves exist in minds or collapse in minds. It's like single digit percentages.
Yeah, they do.
So not really. So it's like single digit percentages. Like, if you look at the polls for consciousness collapse,
sure.
like,
I mean, the thing is, I think what Arkani Hammad and other high energy physicists are discovering has only had documented evidence since like 2017. So I mean, yeah, I think you're having more and more physicists come out, like John Hagelin, Henry Stapp, saying that consciousness is the unified field. And so it's not popular because this idea that space and time is not fundamental is not very old. It's a relatively new, paradigm shifting kind of thing.
Well, emergent
so I would expect
really
that in
popular.
5 to 10 years, you'd see a lot more physicists say that, what can we, what is like Henry Stapp, for instance, says that consciousness may be the thing that is resistant to superposition, which is exactly what we're looking for wave function collapse. And of course, it's just a hypothesis. You can't quite prove it yet, but there's mathematical theories of consciousness, there's quantum cognition. So people are working on this stuff. And it's just as good a theory as any other, I suspect.
Not exactly. So space-time being emergent is the consensus, as far as I know. Most physicists agree space-time is emergent, but the consciousness aspect has been around since the 1940s. It's the Wigner von Neumann hypothesis. You can Google it, and there's polls on this throughout time, even more recently, that show this one has lost pretty much all of its popularity. It started pretty popular back then, but even the guy who wrote it, Wigner, I think it was Wigner, who specifically said he was wrong to apply quantum effects on the macro scale, and that it has nothing to do with consciousness. Consciousness is a macro effect, and these micro interactions of quantum physics really don't have anything to do with it. And because of the progress that we have made in emergent spacetime, it seems like it's emergent from other physical things that we have good evidence for in quantum mechanics, not because of consciousness. So like there's the poll, the foundational attitudes of quantum mechanics or something is the name of the poll. They go through all of these things and they show that most physicists agree space-time is emergent. They agree that there are these weird effects, but like 2% are believe consciousness has anything to do with it. Does consciousness have anything to do with the collapse of the wave particle? Everybody says no. So it's not a thing. So, and it's
Never
not really.
heard anyone say no, because I mean I've never heard even physicists like Sean Carroll. I'm reading Something Deeply Hidden, and he certainly doesn't believe that consciousness collapses the wave function, but he wouldn't go as far as to say no, that's out the window. He believes in a many worlds hypothesis of wave function collapse, which to a lot of people is the least parsimonious theory in the history of science. Not that they discount it for that reason, but I think because things are so spooky, spookhoft, as Einstein put it, in the quantum realm. I think the physicists that I've heard, from Sean Carroll to Henry Stapp, are a lot more humble, right, with respect to other people's theories and saying whether or not they're sensible or not, even though there is a consensus among physicists with what they think, is the best explanation given all these hypotheses.
So here's the actual question on the poll. It's about the observer. Does the observer effect cause the collapse of the wave function? Does the consciousness plays a distinguished role, physical role, e.g., wave function collapse by consciousness, 6%. This is not something that many physicists take seriously. Should play no fundamental role whatsoever, 21%. That's pretty good. Is a complex quantum mechanism. That's fine. So no one really thinks consciousness collapse is a thing here, as it's just not a thing taken seriously in physics. All of the other models explain it much better.
Yeah, the only reason I would, the only pushback that I would give you on that, I think most paradigm shifting ideas began with a very small percentage. So the small percentage of physicists that might take an idea seriously right now doesn't really affect me that much. I have to make myself a student of both sides. So I have to make myself a student of Sean Carroll, that disagrees with consciousness collapsing the wave function, and make myself a student of John Hagelin, who supposes that consciousness is the unified field. Both of them are quantum physicists. Both of them are string theorists. Both of them are coming at it from a different approach. But I don't take the approach of appealing to the majority and saying, okay, the answer is, the question is sufficiently answered by this majority in the field. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but that's the Bozo the Clown argument from Carl Sagan. So you're right that every revolutionary idea started with a few people and everyone disagreed with them. But every terrible idea also started with a few people and everyone disagreed with them. So the fact that everybody disagrees with new ideas is just the starting point. The difference here is that there's usually some new revolutionary piece of evidence that indicates it. And that's really the thing that you need before you take it seriously. Just saying that most physicists disagree is a pretty good reason to reject it, because from a probabilistic standpoint, if the consensus of experts rejects it, it's going to be wrong 99% of the time. There's going to be 1%, 0.0001% that are great ideas that should revolutionize the field. But if the consensus disagrees, that's a good reason to reject it until new evidence is presented, which will then convince the experts.
But I think you're being a little bit obtuse with the term rejection, because this is just me. I mean, I'm listening to a lot of different physicists on these topics, and whenever they say, oh, I have a mini world interpretation of wave function collapse, or I believe that a density matrix causes the wave function collapse, which means they don't believe in von Neumann chains, or someone says, oh, I believe that consciousness is fundamental, and that presents this duality that most physicists don't appreciate. It's okay. Someone has to be in the minority. But what I'm not hearing from physicists, and you might be able to, send me in the back channel or link me to some physicist that says that consciousness being the unified field or collapsing the wave function is ridiculous. That's just not what I'm hearing. So it's not that a physicist that believes in a many world interpretation will say, oh, consciousness being the unified field is ridiculous, or consciousness being fundamental is ridiculous. I completely reject that. It's not so much a rejection of something that's less plausible as an accepting of something else. So I can say, okay, this is more parsimonious. This explains the majority of the data in a way that I understand, while not necessarily saying that my opponents, and it's not even really an opponent, they're all after the same thing. So I don't think that there's a war among them yet with respect to these ideas, because they're so novel. They're so, I think there's a big question mark when it comes to wave function collapse. Certain physicists don't even believe the wave function does collapse. They think, I think Nima Arkani Hamed, he doesn't think the wave function collapses at all, which is mind-boggling to me. It's like, I have to really, because he said that a couple of times, and it's just, he gets to the point where he's beyond me, where I just have to kind of tap out and say, I really don't understand the math and the physics at this point. And so I'm kind of scouring YouTube for better explanations of what he means by that. But, there's so many different ideas that to say that a group of physicists, because they represent 6% of the population of physicists with their idea on what collapses the wave function, yeah, they're by no means out of the game. You shouldn't land on, you shouldn't land. I guess that's what I'll say. So, somebody who says, look, I'm dogmatically in favor of this side because, they have the most beef or they have the highest population, I think that's an inappropriate move.
I don't think so, because I think that I don't think you need physics. There are lots of physicists who said consciousness collapse is ridiculous, but I don't think you need that. I think that what you need
that? Like,
is,
can you give me a physicist that says that's ridiculous?
yeah, the guy who invented it, Wigner von Neumann, one of those two, actually said it. It's in the wiki where he was going through the fact that he presented his model. And
I know Eugene Wigner changed his position, but he never called his original position ridiculous.
yeah, he said he was wrong to apply any of these quantum states to the macro level. So he literally said this was ridiculous.
He literally said it's ridiculous. He used the word ridiculous?
No, I was using literally figuratively, but he said that he was wrong, that it was completely in error. So that's about as close as ridiculous as you get in the scientific community. I am completely wrong to have applied
an error.
this
That doesn't mean they're ridiculous in the scientific community. Scientists hope to be in error. Being in error means that you have an opportunity to learn. It's not ridiculous to be in error.
They don't usually hope to be wrong. No, they hope to be right, but because that's how they win Nobel Prizes. They want everyone else to be wrong. But so the closest you can get to ridiculous in any scientific field is to say, I was wrong. They're completely wrong. That's as close as you get. They're not, like, the word ridiculous doesn't have any scientific meaning to it. You're either,
but I don't think Eugene Wigner said I was absolutely wrong.
Yeah, he said
he changed his perspective because he found better data.
So if he says I was wrong to apply quantum effects to the consciousness level, that's about as close as you can get to that. That's as
close as you can get to saying I was being ridiculous, and von Neumann, my partner, is ridiculous for holding to this, and the people who believe that consciousness collapses the wave function, or that the conscious creature counts as an observer, these people are ridiculous. That's not what the physicists are saying.
It is. They are saying there are many who actually literally say that.
Can you just name me one physicist that I can type up? I have my computer right here that says that that consciousness collapsing the wave function is ridiculous. Like, can you just give me a physicist besides Lawrence Krauss? Because Lawrence might say that, but I think even Lawrence Krauss has matured a little bit. I don't think that he would go so far as to say that, because he knows Henry Stapp and Hagelin.
I would have to look it up, but this is not really a hard thing to find. Like, it's the fact that it's taken so littly seriously shows that, yeah, it's going to be pretty easy to find that.
I don't know. But anyway, I mean, I think it's
Thank
at
you,
least a
Git.
competitor.
Thank you,
When
Git, for
you
the super
find
chat. Appreciate it.
say again.
Thank you, Git, for the super chat. He gave me a super chat.
Oh yeah, thanks. And remember to I'll shoot you my Cash App so we can split the super chats. Um, all I want is I want $4 of it, and you could take the other six.
I will take 150%, and you'll get a negative 50%. That means you owe me money.
Why do we keep doing the math this way? This is the possible universe where we split the super chat because I converted you. This is that universe. You keep messing up the universe we're in. So you know that Nima Arkani Hamed, with his amplitude hedron, the reason that, according to Donald Hoffman, I think Hoffman and Ahmed are working together with Hoffman's mathematical theory of consciousness because he's finding the same thing. So in his mathematical theory of consciousness, there are geometric shapes that give rise to consciousness, similar geometric shapes that Nima Arkani Hamed is finding at the Hadron Collider with scattering amplitudes. And so they're very close to a mathematical theory of consciousness.
Whoa.
That consciousness can be described in mathematical terms.
That would be great. I don't see that happening anytime soon, but if they do, that would be great evidence.
But I mean, but like, this is something you already believe, right? You believe that that consciousness is kind of superimposed on physical states, that when there is a conscious state or a change in a conscious state, that implies a change in a material state within the brain.
Sure.
So it wouldn't surprise you, it wouldn't surprise someone like you that there is a mathematical description of cognitive processes.
Right. There's going to be infinitely many of them. So like there's physicists that have all kinds of very silly, crazy theories. So I'm going to have Frank Tipler on. He thinks that God is a singularity and that it's a triune singularity. So there's a singularity at the beginning of time, a singularity during all of time, and a singularity at the end of time, and that's God. And that
see, like, you got to have fun with it. Like, why not? Is this guy a physicist?
Yep, he is a legit.
Have you heard of Tom Campbell?
Yes, it's familiar. I don't remember anything about him, but this guy's theory is great. So he says Jesus literally resurrected because of the boson decay in the neutrons and protons of all of the particles in his body, literally decayed at the same time and then recoalesced into a body using physics. This is all physics. And he has super math on this. He's a professional physicist. And he says the virgin birth is possible because of the X. In some very small percentage of the female population, they have a genetic change in them that allows them to have both the XX and XY chromosomes in their body. They're just not being used. And there is a random chance that these could coalesce to cause asexual reproduction in a human body. And he says this is how the virgin birth happened. So he's giving all of these physics explanations of everything that could happen. And you could do this with anything. Like quantum mechanics says that a pink tiger could pop into existence at any time. So you can use physics to justify anything you want. And it's not hard to do if you're a professional physicist. And so the fact that people can come up with hypotheses in physics and say, well, maybe this explains it, isn't really very impressive. Anybody can do that. The problem here is that
in chapter 1 of Sean Carroll's Something Deeply Hidden, he's talking about like the shelves full of like Deepak Chopra books that you can find, like Quantum Love, Quantum what is it, Quantum Joy. There's books on like quantum dieting.
Well, those are all woo. So I'm talking about literal physicists. So a literal physicist can literally use actual physics to justify anything they want. It's just improbable, but it could happen. And so the fact that you can come up with professional academic level physics explanations of consciousness or the virgin birth or singularities at the end of time.
Well, I mean, but you shouldn't be. It's weird. And I don't know if you're resistant to it, but this is your wheelhouse. Like, you're someone who actually believes that consciousness is not, you're not a dualist. You don't believe that consciousness is separate, is in this completely separate, spooky category from physical matter. So you're the exact person who should expect a mathematical description to come along for it, right?
Yeah, but it's like the super chat said earlier. So the super chat said the focus should be on predictions, not purely conceptions and the operations of reality. If we focus on human conceptions, you can, from the mind, you can end up with absurdity. So the idea
Absolutely
to make
true.
up the fact that you can make up a mathematical language to describe consciousness is meaningless to me. Like, you can make up whatever language you want until we have hard empirical evidence. I don't care. I don't care if Sean Carroll or physicists that I agree with my position did this. It's still just them making shit up. I need hard evidence and testable predictions, something more than they can make up a mathematical language that could potentially describe something. I don't care. I need
So you're
evidence.
resistant to a mathematical theory of consciousness.
Until it makes predictions, yes. Any theory of consciousness is just that. It's something people made up. You need some way to differentiate that made up hypothesis with all the other made up hypotheses and to show that one of them is more likely to correspond to reality and not just their imagination. And that's the part I'm waiting for.
So even if no one came up with a mathematical theory of consciousness, you as a non-dualist would believe that consciousness has a mathematical description.
Maybe
because
non-dualist.
because you think that consciousness emerges from material, and all
Yeah,
material has mathematical descriptions. So
maybe not necessarily.
so you're saying there's a possibility that consciousness is disconnected, because
Yeah, yeah,
what I'm trying to do is meet you where you are
right.
and show you that atheism and theism may in the near future have a convergence point where the theist is able to say with confidence, ha, there is an spaceless, timeless, immaterial consciousness, which is fundamental, from which all space time is emergent. And the atheist can say, ha, all of that is natural, and none of it has supernatural descriptions. All of it is mathematically describable. And so they can meet and say, okay, let's, now that we have converged, and of course, this is in the future because mathematical theories of consciousness, like you said, aren't testable, even though they're finding similar geometries in the mathematical theories as they are at the Hadron Collider. This is still yet future. When that day comes, when that marvelous, glorious day comes, we can stop having this debate about whether or not God exists.
I don't think the panpsychists are going to win, but the first thing is that we can't describe all physical things with equations. So it's not true that all physical things can be described with equations. For example, what matter is made of, we cannot describe that with an equation. We can describe with an equation how it interacts with other matter, but we can't say inside of a proton, it's made of X. That's not an equation. So equations can't represent all physical things. It's just not possible. So that would not mean, even if there's possible ways consciousness could be physical and would not be represented by math, that would be fine. It wouldn't be a
Yeah, but
contradiction.
E equals MC squared is an equation that describes matter.
No, it describes how it interacts. So it describes the relationship between energy and mass, but it doesn't describe what it's made of. It doesn't tell us what energy is made of. It doesn't tell us what mass is made of. Does not
Well, I mean,
explain that.
I agree. There's a rabbit hole that you tumble into, because what matter is mass, and what mass is resistance to acceleration, and what
Mm.
acceleration is. I mean, so you do tumble into a rabbit hole of a long chain of things when you kind of probe for kind of what's going on there. Is that what you're talking about?
No, no. I mean, so I had a conversation with Philip Goff. He's a panpsychist, and one of the points he brings up often is that literally nothing in physics tells you what matter is made of. It doesn't tell you any of that. It can't. It just tells you the interactions. What physics is measuring is how one thing we observe interacts with another thing we observe. But we don't know what they're made of. We have no idea. We can't represent that with physics. It's impossible to represent with an equation what the essence of it is made of, because there's no like equal sign, because an equal sign says that the thing on the left side equals the thing on the right side. But what it's made of isn't like a thing on either side. It's just what it's made of. You can't like say it's made of this and then put something else on the side of the equation, because it's not a differential equation. You can't do that when you're just saying it's made of X. So there's no way for physics to simply describe what it's actually made of, because it can only describe what the stuff is interacting and how it's interacting, whatever it's made of. So, for example, if you switch matter with supernatural matter or something, you still have no idea. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two. It would just say that, oh, look, they interact with the same frequency. And so nothing in physics can describe what physical stuff is literally made of.
So you're resistant to the efficacy of applied mathematics, because I mean, when I think of physics, I think it's just kind of an applied mathematics,
Well,
right?
applied mathematics is
Kumram
fine.
says the difference between mathematics and physics is that physics cares about reality.
Right.
Um,
So it is applied is fine. The applied part is what is it's applied to is the interaction. So if I wanted to predict how a proton is going to affect when it's hit by a neutrino going at X amount of speed, that's very good, but you can never know what the proton and the neutrino are made of. All you can do is know that they interact in this certain way. So nothing in physics can ever tell you what physical stuff is made of. It's not a thing we've discovered how to do yet. I would suggest check out the conversations with Philip Goff. He mentions this quite often. Mine with him, we mentioned it a few times.
and so you agree with Philip Hoff's interpretation of that?
Well, no,
Because
all
you're not a
physicists.
panpsychist yourself.
Well, this isn't about panpsychism. This is agreed upon in all of physics. We literally have no way in physics to describe what energy or what the fundamental thing of physical stuff is. We can't describe that with the equations. Equations can't do that. They aren't capable of doing that. So this is just a
So,
common thing in
so what
physics.
do you think equations are doing in physics? What do you think that mathematics? How do you think mathematics operates in physics?
It's like a
Because it
scale.
has a descriptive. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's like a scale. So if you put an object on one side of the scale and an object on a different side of the scale, it'll show you the difference between the two objects. You have no idea what the objects are. No, you don't know what they're made of. You just know that, oh, this object is causes the scale to go down when this object is opposite. So the relation between these two is this one's heavier. So physics and the equations, the equal sign is like a scale. It just shows the representational balance between the two things. It doesn't tell you what the two things are made of. It's like there's no way you can use a scale to determine what material is on the scale. You can just know what, well, this one's heavier than this one, and this one's heavier than this one. But you can never know, like scales don't have like a video camera that can show you what's on it. It's just representing a relationship between the two objects. And that's all physics is doing. Differential equations are representing the relationship between the two things being measured, but they don't tell you what's on the scale. They can't do that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So you're saying that we don't know what these objects are, but the mathematics is just used to describe them.
Yes. Mathematics
Okay.
is
So
interactions.
right. So if we don't know what consciousness is, um, we could still potentially use mathematics to describe it, even though
Sure.
the description would be different than the like describing what it is. Um, like I could give a mathematical interpretation of this AirPod set, right, without telling you a layman's definition of what it actually is. So you're sympathetic then to the idea that there might be, in principle, a mathematical theory of consciousness
Sure.
that they're
Sure.
describing something that they can't say, okay, we're down to brass tacks on what actually consciousness is.
Sure, there's necessarily going to be infinitely many of them. Yes.
I don't know if there could be infinitely many, but sure, there'll be a lot of them.
Take any equation, add 1 to both sides, and then add 2 to both sides, and 3 to both sides. Like you can there's necessarily infinitely many equations to represent anything.
Yeah, I don't know about that, about adding 1 or 2 to both sides or whatever. You might be right,
So
but
if you in any equation, if you add like say 5 equals 5, if I add 1 to both sides, 6 equals 6, or you could say like F equals ma. F equals if you add +6 to one side and -6 to the other side or whatever, you get the same thing. Like in algebra class, they teach you that if you have a division on one side, you add it, you flip it over and make it a multiplication on the other side, you get the same result.
yeah,
It's the same thing. So you just take the equation and you can infinitely many change both sides to get the same result.
sure. And I don't know what kind of mathematics they're playing with. I wish at this stage in my life, I really wish I would have paid more attention to math class in high school. You know what I'm saying? So that I could follow a little bit closer for a little bit further, instead of falling off when kind of the math is presented.
If
But
they
yeah,
taught
I mean,
quantum
like,
mechanics in high school, damn.
huh?
If they were teaching quantum mechanics in your high school, you went to a really good high school.
Like, so Henry Stapp, for instance, says that consciousness may be the very thing that's resistant to superposition. So he said, I wrote this down right here. He said, nature answers questions that we as observers ask. And it's his weird kind of description of quantum mechanics. He's a quantum physicist, and by that asking, he's talking about that question that caused Einstein to say that quantum mechanics was spooky, right? The idea that if I don't look at the moon's no longer there. That if I step outside of my office and decide to look at what's outside, nature will respond to that question, the question that my eyes have asked, what's there? So the waves that are there right now will collapse into a reality, a particular reality for me. Of course, not everybody holds this idea, but Henry Stapp is taken extremely seriously. I mean, his credentials are up there, which is not an appeal to authority. Just kind of saying it's. I think it's very, very responsible to approach these complicated ideas, especially as a non-physicist, with a giant slice of humble pie, and not assume that I am familiar with what the definite answers are. But I'm hopeful for a mathematical theory of consciousness that is decidedly fundamental, which is will make it more rational, at least in a scientific discussion, to say that the cause of the universe is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and conscious, and therefore convert TJump.
Yes, if we have evidence of that, that would be great. Just having a mathematical model would not do that. You need actual evidence to confirm the model is correct, because we have lots of math that could describe
that's
reality.
Fair. That's true. Right.
So
that's true.
That's the part I'm more interested in. Like, there's going to be lots of different mathematical models. Most of them are going to be wrong. Only one of them is going to be right. And to figure out which one, you need novel testable predictions. Also, thank you, Get, for the super chat. And I need to take a break. I gotta piss. Be back in a minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Biscuit Show. I'm taking over for TJump. And, before we kick this off, I want to start with a word of prayer. So if everybody in TJump's live would mind closing your eyes, putting your hand together and just focusing on your breath for a while. Well, Father God, we thank you for TJump's conversion. We thank you for his channel and all of his subscribers that are listening to the sound of my voice. Father, we ask you to bless them and cause them to realize that you are spaceless, timeless, immaterial, conscious, and aware, and that they are all disassociated members of this singular consciousness. We ask that you just for a moment, God, remove the disassociation and cause them to understand that they are a part of who you are. In the same way that Jesus said, I and the Father are one, we say that and we embrace those concepts today. We understand that you are fundamental. We understand that the distance between ourselves is not true and it's not real. And we embrace the unity that we are being shown is fundamental reality. In the name of Jesus, amen. All of you are converted. Welcome to the faith. And I thank you all for joining me. Super chat. It's like Lance Bush hinted at. Oh, I love Lance Bush. I've had great conversations with Lance. It's like Lance Bush hinted at. Philosophers should focus more on anthropology or human psychology or linguistics because the world gives us more insight as to why we have ideas that we do. I'm a big fan of Lance. Lance and I talk on Clubhouse all the time. He is a moral anti-realist. And he really, really does a great job on YouTube debating against moral realists. And I think that Sam Harris, for as much criticism as he gets from the moral landscape, I think he really did do a good job using the hypothetical imperative to overstep the is-ought dilemma and arrive at a objective set of moral values. So I am not a moral anti-realist. I'm a moral realist, even though I would not be equal to a debate with Lance Bush. He's a very intelligent guy. Welcome back, TJump. I converted all of your followers.
It's nice.
You now have a bunch of Christian followers now. How do you choose to continue given this insight?
I will continue to bring on Christian professors to make them happy so they give me money. That's my strategy.
That's your strategy?
Yep. I think I found a way to do Clubhouse on computers now, so I can definitely try that out more. Send me a link to your Clubhouse or whatever. Try it there. But thank you, Frank, for the super chat. Pair character. Oh, I get it. It's a logo.
Look, one of your people in the chat said, "Was he casting a spell on us?" When you left, I prayed for the entire chat and converted all.
Nice. I approve of this message. All right, so what were we talking about?
Let me ask you this. What questions do you have for me?
You're a Christian, right?
Yes. I call myself a Christian mystic. Just as a respectful reference to the fact that there are some things that are kind of out of the norm for the Western church that I believe in, right? I think the majority of Western Christians would say that if you don't believe that the resurrection and death of Jesus Christ is necessary for your salvation, then you're not a Christian. And so I think that the mystics believed that what Jesus believed about himself, we should believe about ourselves. And we should rely on the message of Jesus if we're to call ourselves Christians. We're not to be followers of the Apostle Paul or anyone else besides Jesus.
So, and as you stated earlier, the thing you think that is the most Christian thing to do is to help the poor, to help the people in need, to do good things, right? Good deeds. So, given what it says in the Old Testament, God murdered a bunch of people. That seems very unchristian of him.
That seems very unchristian.
Yes. Like if the goal of Christianity, the most moral thing to do is to help people in need, God mass murdered the crap out of millions of babies. Seems like not a great moral entity in order to worship, not the best.
So here's what I find fascinating about the Bible with respect to that point. The Bible is a different text than the Quran. And this might be another area where I separate from a lot of Western Christians. When you talk to a Muslim, they're going to tell you the Quran was not written by men. This is the dictated, authoritative word of Allah, filtered through Muhammad, right? So this is the perfect words of Allah. I don't think that that's the biblical tradition. I think in the biblical tradition, you have a bunch of men who are confused about the who, what, when, where, why of God, and express that kind of gap between their epistemology and their ontology, what they believe and what is. So I think that the Bible is an evolving narrative. I think it makes total sense to say in this day and age, it was terrible, the atrocities that occurred in the Old Testament. I completely agree. The only difference for me is that I think that that's a little redundant. It would be like seeing a mud hut in ancient Mesopotamia and laughing at how foolish their house building skills were from the perspective of a 21st century American, right? So when you're looking at people who lived in this ancient time, yeah, their moral epistemology was not aligned with ontology. They were working on that. And so the reason I bring up the reason I brought up Islam was because the Bible is a different tradition. The Bible is not one book, it's a library. And there are disagreeing perspectives. So you'll find times where the Apostle Paul disagrees with something that David said in the Psalms. They had different perspectives on who God was and how God acted. I think Jesus overturned a lot of what was in the Old Testament. Jesus said often, "You've heard it said thus and so, but I'm saying to you this," right? And the Pharisees hated him for that. And so when you see an atrocity in the Old Testament, I see that same atrocity and say, yeah, that's an atrocity. This wasn't something that was commanded by God. This was written by men trying to understand God from their various perspectives. And a lot of those ancient war texts were taken from Babylonian codes and were Babylonian stories that they um, brought into their own tradition. Like the Noah story was brought in from the Epic of Gilgamesh from Mesopotamia, right? So a lot of those Old Testament stories were kind of brought on, were something that they didn't go through, but stories that they had handed down to them.
So how do you determine
The soapbox.
which is the correct parts of the Bible versus the man-made parts?
Well, I think that men can make things that are correct. Those two ideas aren't opposed. Both of us agree that Nima Arkani Hamed, for instance, he's a man, but we think he's correct. So just because something's man-made doesn't mean it's incorrect, right?
Well, I mean, like, so how do you determine the parts of the Bible that were not objectively true and the parts that are objectively true? So the part like, did God actually drown the world? You would say no, I'm guessing.
I would say no, but I think that story, not only was that story taken from the Gilgamesh epic, and I think there's 2,000 narratives, ancient flood narratives. There's Nu and Abzu. I think there's Nima and Zu for in Egypt. There's flood myths in China, and when I looked into this, a lot of these flood myths that originated in Mesopotamia were a result of the Ice Age, the end of the Ice Age, and the melting of the ice from the Ice Age, causing water levels to rise around the world. And so there was a lot of floods going on, and that's what generated all of the flood myths, from which the biblical flood myth is a later tradition. And so I take those stories seriously.
Well,
Meaning I do
my
think that a
question is
lot of
more
people
like,
died in great floods around that time.
well, my question is more like, how do we determine what are the things God did do actually that were really done or said or inspired by God versus the things God didn't do? Like he didn't flood the earth, okay, but he does say help the poor. How do we determine which ones are the correct things that God actually means versus the things that were just a subjective interpretation of the time period?
Well, I think you said it rightly. I think when you use the term inspired, someone can be inspired by this discussion and go to school and become a physicist, right? Someone else can be inspired by this discussion to go and to leave their local church and embrace atheism, right? Those are two vastly different things that you can do as a result of your inspiration from the exact same thing. Like Martin Luther King was inspired by the Bible, and so were a lot of keepers of slaves, right? So just because you're inspired by a thing, that doesn't speak to a correspondence idea of what the truth happens to be. I think that the Bible writers were all inspired by the same God and came up with different stories, different myths, different traditions, and different ways of being as a result of their inspiration of the same idea.
Sure, but I want to know what parts of the Bible should I think are the correct statements and which are the incorrect statements? Which are the ones that are objectively true at all times and which are the ones that are only true to some subjective society that they interpreted? So there was no global flood, so that part is not true. And then the part about helping the poor, that part is true objectively. How do we determine which statements in the Bible are of the objectively true kind and which are of the objectively not true kind?
Well, I think that you can kind of look at biblical scholars all the way uh, from James White to Bart Ehrman, who can break the Bible down for you and say these books are poetry, so they should be taken. Like Psalms and Proverbs are largely poetic. The book of Revelation is symbolic and prophetic. There are certain books that are meant to be taken historically. Like, for instance, the Gospels were written some of them from the perspective of history. The reason they don't qualify as myths is because they use real towns and peoples. So historians would say, okay, the Gospels don't qualify as myth, even though there might be mythological language placed on top of a real narrative. So we know that there's really a Nazareth, there was really a Jerusalem, there was really a Pontius Pilate. Most historians agree there was really a Jesus. And so it's not really easy to break the answer to that question down in a short amount of time, but it's about reading the Bible literarily instead of literally. And what that means is to see the book the individual book that you're reading as being written by a specific author in a specific time period for a specific purpose, and not seeing the entire Bible as something like Harry Potter that's written for by one person with one intention. um does that make sense?
Sort of, but like people intended the Moses story to be real. They thought the Moses story was a real thing. That was the most common interpretation during the early church and probably still today. So why should we say that as it was intended and interpreted to be a real thing, even though we know there's no evidence Moses is real? Why should we choose to interpret that to be not literal? Why should we think that that was not just evidence the Bible is wrong and instead interpret it as like, well, it's just allegorical?
Well, I would answer that question by answering this by giving you the narrative of like a Disney movie, and I think you and I have talked about this before, or we may have addressed it before. If me and my daughter are watching Pinocchio, Disney's Pinocchio, and after the movie goes off, she says, "Was that real? Was that true?" I think it would be, in my estimation, immature as a parent to give a flat no, that wasn't real, um, because that leaves behind the truth that is deeply in that movie. There's tons of pragmatic truth, tons of coherence, though the character Pinocchio doesn't correspond to reality. If that's what you left with, then you would be woefully ignorant to what the writer of that movie intended you to pull out of it. So I think we don't do ourselves I think we do ourselves a big disservice when we look at a complicated ancient tradition and merely ask ourselves if these narratives correspond to some physical or scientific reality. I really don't think that was their intention. The correspondence theory of truth is relatively young on the philosophical stage. The truths that they were after were existential relevance, right? This story has existential relevance for me. Jesus walking on water means that there can be calm found in the midst of the storm. And if the only thing that you take from that narrative is Jesus walking on water doesn't correspond to something existentially real, I think you've entirely missed the point.
But you're saying that there are some things in the Bible that do correspond to reality, like Jesus existed, God exists, right?
Sure. I
Holy
think so.
Spirit, Holy Spirit exists.
I'm not sure what Jesus meant by the Holy Spirit, but I think that the Holy Spirit is what testifies to the relationship between Christ and the Father in traditional Christian theology. But
Okay, so
I kind of think that was beside Jesus's major point too. The thing that Jesus talked about for the majority of the time wasn't the Holy Spirit. I think he talked about the Holy Spirit once.
okay, so let's say you're watching Pinocchio with your daughter, and your daughter asked, "Is this real?" And she's like, "Is the cat real?" You say, "Yeah, the cat's real." You said, "Is the dad real?" You're like, "Yeah, the dad's real." And like, "Is Pinocchio real?" No, the Pinocchio is not real. And then she's like, "Okay, so how do you tell which ones are the real ones and which ones are not the real ones?" Because that's the question here. So you're saying some of the characters are real, some of the characters are not real, and it seems like the only evidence for any of the characters comes from the movie. So how do you differentiate which ones are the real ones and which ones are not the real ones?
How do you differentiate between whether or not Pinocchio is real and the cat is real?
Yeah.
One is a cartoon on a TV, and the other one sitting in your lap purring.
No, no, Pinocchio. There's a cat in the movie. The movie has a cat in it.
There's a cat in the movie Pinocchio.
Yes, its name's Figaro. Has a cat. So I'm asking, in the movie, there's a cat. In the movie, there's a dad. In the movie, there's a guy whose nose grows.
Yeah,
And
nothing in the movie Pinocchio at all corresponds to reality. None of the characters correspond. Figaro doesn't correspond to reality. Pinocchio and Geppetto and Jiminy Cricket are fictional characters.
so, but if I suppose I said yes, Figaro the cat, that's a real cat. But and the dad starts with a G, Geppo or
Geppetto?
something. Yep, that one. He's not real, and Pinocchio is real. So I'm like saying some of the characters are real, some of the characters are not real. What would your response to me be?
Uh, if you were to say certain of the characters in Pinocchio are real and certain of them are not real, personally, I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't care about probing any further. But I mean, I guess if you were trying to convince me of that, I would need some evidence.
Yes, that's great. So in this analogy, Pinocchio the movie is analogous to the Bible, right? And you're saying that some of the characters are real and some of the characters are not real.
No,
And like you,
no, I would never say that certain of the characters in Pinocchio are real.
but in the Bible, certain of the characters are real.
Sure, and I base that on what historians have agreed upon. I'm not a historian myself, but the majority of historians agree that there was a King Herod, a Jesus, a Pontius Pilate.
But the God one, that one is not really supported by historians.
Correct. I think the majority of historians would be believers in God. The majority of historians are certainly not atheists, but that doesn't inform their historical perspective.
Right. So the historical evidence does not indicate that a literal God exists, but you believe a literal God exists.
Certainly, I don't look toward. I think history is the wrong field to look at to ask about questions about history. Beings that are not objects within space and time. So
Right.
Jesus was an object within space and time. King Herod was a spatial temporal object.
Right.
And
So
so historians can study that's in their realm of that's in their purview. Whereas whether God exists would be a question of philosophy, and I think the scientific community is having, in my estimation, more and more to say.
so it's like Satan exists. I assume you would think Satan is real. Angels, demons,
No,
souls. No.
I think souls exist for sure. I think that what you are is beyond description, which makes the Bible an excellent resource about who God is, the ineffable nature of God. Because I think that you yourself are ineffable. If I were to ask who you are, you would eventually run out of objects to distinguish from the subject, which is the self. And then, if I were to ask you, who are you? There would be very little to say.
Well, so like my question here is that there's a bunch of stories in the characters of the Bible, like the Satan, demons, angels, God, Holy
Sure.
Spirit, Jesus, and a lot of them are non-physical. Some of them you say exist, like God. Some of them you say don't exist, like Satan or the demons. And I want to know, how do we differentiate which ones exist and which ones don't exist? What is the method that we can use to show God is more reasonable to believe than the demons?
Well, no, I think that you're already on that journey. You don't need me to tell you which of these exist and don't exist. What I'm trying to get you to do is look at the perspective of the writer. So,
Well,
and
I'm
that's
asking you
what,
how you do it.
and that's what someone can tell you, regardless of whether they're a Christian or non-Christian historian or biblical critic or biblical advocate. What they all will collapse upon is the truth that this author had a certain intention, right? And what was the intention of this author? Was the intention of this author to write a poem that should be expressed from a poetic standpoint? Is this a war text? And so whether or not, if I were to tell you that if I were to write a story about God, it's up to you whether or not you find evidence for that God. But I think the best way to read my story is, looking at the time period that I lived in and the intention I had behind writing it.
Sure. I understood your perspective, but this is like what questions do I have for you? The questions do I have for you is that you say there are certain non-physical beings exist, certain non-physical beings don't exist, and I want to know the method that you use to differentiate between those two. I want to understand why you think God exists, why you don't think demons exist, because I think neither exist.
I actually don't think that physical beings do exist. Just to correct you there, I am an idealist. So
Okay.
I guess that could get into another realm of the conversation, but I
Yeah,
take
it's a
the
different
the
topic.
space time is doomed talk very seriously. I think that the difference between you and I is not something fundamental. I think that on a fundamental level, there is no space between us, as creepy as that sounds, and there is no actual time where my statements are being converted to future events by that, tiny, slice of time called the present. I don't believe that any of that is fundamental. So I believe in a real sense, right now, there is no distance between us and there is no time between my sentences. I think that we have to perceive that. I think we should take it seriously, though not literally.
Okay, I can just grant idealism is true. It's the same question is my same question is still there, is why should we think that God is real and demons are not real?
I think that, the idea that God is real isn't something that the Bible is trying to convince you of. The reason I'm convinced that God is real is because God makes the most sense of questions of origin, meaning, and morality and destiny for me in a coherent and correspondent way. And atheism for me fails to do that. That would be principally. I mean, we could go into the Kalam cosmological argument, or all the William Lane Craig stuff that you would deny and that I would affirm. Right now, I believe that God is an unembodied mind from which all matter and energy is emergent, and I'm certainly sympathetic to mathematical theories of consciousness that hope to bring that to light in the scientific community, though they haven't as of yet.
So
So
why are
my
you
ideas about why God makes sense are aside from the worth or the value that I get from the Bible.
okay? So why are you a Christian as opposed to a Hindu or a Muslim or any of the other ones
I'm
that espouse a
sympathetic
God?
to so much in Hinduism that it's insane. I'm very sympathetic to the Vedic traditions and the Upanishads. I think that Christianity, for me, the reason I love it so much is because the tradition shows that doubt is a giant part of your faith, and I feel like I'm on that same journey. Jesus said from the cross, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" That was a time of doubt in the life of the greatest the greatest living being, according to Christians, would have been Jesus, and he had that moment of doubt. Same thing with Abraham and David and all of the patriarchs. And so that confusion and those faults, the fact that those faults are presented so clearly and not hidden, means that I'm on the same journey as them. That's the reason that I'm so respectful of the Christian tradition. And one of the reasons that I'm so antagonistic against the Islamic tradition. Not to bring that into the conversation, but I've had conversations with Muslims where they say to me, the Bible is so full of contradictions. The Quran doesn't have any contradictions. I would disagree with that. First and foremost, there are lots of contradictions in the Quran. But what I say to them is that I appreciate the contradictions because it means that the men who wrote it down were confused. It mean even the Apostle Paul says, "I count myself not to have apprehended it." Right? He's saying these are concepts that we won't reach the end of. So according to the biblical tradition, God is a horizon that you sail toward. It's not an end that you come to in this life. And so I'm very sympathetic to that tradition, and I'm on the same journey as them. And so that's the reason I call myself Christian.
So to me, it seems like the God hypothesis makes sense to most people because of evolutionary biases. And so the fact that we have evolutionary biases tends to make it so that we believe in hyperactive agency detection, that we see things, can't explain it, mind must have done it, therefore God. And that seems like to be the origin of the God hypothesis. Like if you've seen Robert Sapolsky's Origin of Religions in Schizophrenics lecture, he's a professor at Stanford. It's a really good one that explains that the reason God makes sense to most people seems to have a very good evolutionary basis, but it doesn't seem to have any evidential basis. Doesn't that put doubt in your belief that because people have this tendency to think that minds did it, don't you think that could be a contributing factor into why you think God is a better explanation for these things?
Certainly.
But it's not enough to convince you otherwise.
No. Why should it? I mean, I think if when you hear a rustling in the bushes, you jump away because of that agency detection you were talking about. If you jump, you are more adaptive than someone who says, "Oh, come on,
Right.
I have that agency detection. Let me just chill out. It's probably not a
Right.
snake." That's the reason. It's what led Brett Weinstein to say that religious people are evolutionarily fitter than non-religious people, not because God exists, but because religion is an adaptive form of evolution. Why should I abandon it? given that. If something brings me purpose and we are purpose seekers by evolutionary process, it makes total sense that I should believe in God, and it doesn't make any sense that I should resist it. There doesn't seem to be any truth value present in resisting it. Other than that, I think that there's, regardless of the fact that I'm seated very deeply within my bias, I think you are too. I think we're tribe seekers and not truth seekers, and there's scientific evidence to support that. But
I'm gonna clip that. I'm gonna
I
take
mean,
that.
I see all kinds of philosophical and contemporary scientific evidence for the existence of God, none of which I would expect you to accept. Yeah, I'm myths create the worlds they live in, and I think that both you and I are seated in a plethora of myths that we are hopeless to escape.
I'm gonna take that clip where you said Jump is the supremely evolved human. I'm gonna just clip that out and put it in my.
Chill, bro. Chill. We're gonna battle one day, bro. Write some bars. Battle me about this.
Yes, rap battle. I'm gonna do it. Do it. Put it on YouTube. We should do a rap battle at the state senate hearing. That should be like our thing.
Bro, I'm down. I'm down. You should write some bars, bro. We'll battle this out. My rebuttal game is crazy though, bro. Relax.
All right, so we've been going for about an hour and a half. Really appreciate you coming on. It was a lot of fun. I do want to see if there's anybody in the chat who wants to talk or join the convo or something.
Definitely. And I want to join the Discord too, man. Like, I'm so stupid with respect to like that particular piece of technology. Like, I want to jump in there too, but I'm like not finding a way to do it. I'm just too stupid for Discord, I guess. Because I'm in there, like I'm accepting and like I'll send you messages, but I know that that's not working. I want to get in there and actually hear what's going on, like when you're.
Question for Biscuit. If it could objectively demonstrate that God does not exist, would you still argue that people should believe anyway for utility reasons?
Definitely. Unless there could be some truth value in, unless there's value to the truth, I don't see why it should be held on a pragmatic level. Like I could go outside and there is truth to how many leaves are on the tree outside, but I'm not concerned with it because that truth has zero value for me. So when someone says, I want to believe in as many true things as possible, don't believe them. They are lying to you, right? They have no idea how many books are on their shelves. They have no idea how many bristles are on their toothbrush or how many hairs are on their chin. They're not interested. We're interested in pragmatic truths and truths that add value to our lives. And so to the primary question, would I stop believing in God if it were objectively proven to me that God exists? I have no idea. I really don't. I would love to say that I'm that logical and that I'm that moved by empirical evidence, but I'm convinced that I am a tribe seeker, just like everyone else. So if I have a bunch of, neural processes that go back, for a long time, me being comforted by the idea that God exists, I'm not sure that any objective proof would convince me otherwise. But I will say I would hope so. So
another question by Batman Child. Can you see these when I put them on the screen, by the way?
Yeah, I can see them. I can see them down there. I can see them right down there.
Awesome. So is your belief falsifiable?
Is the belief in God falsifiable? No, it's not a scientific hypothesis. So there's a lot of things that are not falsifiable. Falsifiability is something that you look for in science. For instance, I don't think that any of the axioms or premises of epistemology are falsifiable. The basic reliability of sense perception, the idea that you're not a brain in a vat, the analogical use of language, the law of non-contradiction, none of those things are falsifiable, but you're well within your reason to believe in them. And yet, also, you can't really reject them without ending up in an asylum. So, no, the belief in God is not falsifiable. I don't believe that it's falsifiable. Could be wrong, but I don't think so.
David asks, God, which one?
Which one? Which one is an interesting question because it implies that there is some kind of demarcation on a fundamental level, and there doesn't appear to be one. So if there is no space and no time on a fundamental level, what would it mean for one to be demarcated by the other? What would it mean for them to be two? right? And what would instantiate that difference? So when a Muslim says that, I serve a different God than the Christian, I disagree. I think that the Muslim and the Christian disagree on theology, but on a fundamental level, there's only one thing. There's only one thing that there could be, because there is no space, there's no time. What would demarcate one thing from the other?
Well, I think the question is more, there are many different ideas of God and what it's like Thor, Zeus,
I'm a
Poseidon.
Christian.
Yeah. So I think that would be the answer, is that's the Jesus one.
Yeah, I am a Christian.
Cafe asks, question for Biscuit. Has he had what William James called mystical experience, or what Richard M. Buck referred to as cosmic consciousness?
Yes. Yes. I didn't think that I had, because of what I had been told a mystical experience was. But I was a mushroom head for 2 years. Me and my buddy Travis Ransdale. Shout out to Trav. Trav is still a mushroom head. I don't do psychedelics as often, because now I have a child. I have matured. But I used to dabble in the mushrooms heavy. And my first time doing mushrooms, it was put in this juice. So is it okay if I'm talking about this? Is it cool to talk about this on your channel, TJump?
Yeah. I talk about drugs all the time.
Okay, legit. So I would crush up the mushrooms, like dry them and crush them up and boil them up. And so when you drink it, it hits harder, it hits faster. And so there was one time that I got so high on mushrooms, I thought my high had come down because the sun was rising. And I thought I wasn't high anymore. My man Travis told me to step outside. I went outside and I looked into the sky, and I saw these clouds, and I don't know what, I'm not familiar with cloud types, but it's the kind of clouds that look like a giant popcorn kernel that's like stacked super high.
Cumulonimbus.
Yeah. So these giant clouds. And when I looked into the clouds, I felt like I was one with everything. Like what it meant to be a dissociated self melted away. And it was a mixture of fear and love. Fear because I had lost control. Love because my definition of love is seeing yourself in someone else. And so I saw myself in everything around me. I just felt like there was this oneness. And I know that I'm starting to sound stupid, but I had that experience and I began to chase it. So I began to chase that experience. And luckily for me, I didn't try any of the stupid drugs. I only did like the mind enhancing stuff. I did acid once, but it's not for me, because I have come up anxiety, and I'll end up in a forest somewhere acting stupid.
It sounds like a great experiment.
I've had a mystical experience for sure. And I don't think that is the best evidence of God's existence. I know Jordan Peterson and the likes of Jordan Peterson would disagree with that. That it would say that is good evidence for for God. But I'm more along the lines of agreeing with Rupert Spira, who says that the presence of God is within you, and that drugs kind of taint it and taint the reality of what it is. So
I think it's Richard Spira. But Biscuit, what
Spira?
is your favorite?
It's not Spira?
I think it's Spira, pretty sure.
Okay.
I think it's Nima Akani Hamad. But yes, Frank asked, what is your favorite Christian rapper?
My favorite Christian rapper is Biscuit. Let it resound till it's a place in the ground that they bury me. My sound's apparently out of bounds to a Pharisee. Where is he? I go to the roots like talk therapy. It gets so dark when I talk to an op, the blind stare at me. Biscuit, my name almost gave it away. I am a collective consciousness in a state of decay. Every opponent that came in my lane got cut faster than a diamond with a machete made out of paper mache. That last part didn't make sense. Soon as my line ring, it's a crime scene.
And all the people in my chat
tougher than most is for the time being. Yo, I go. I'm good. It's me. I'm my favorite Christian rapper. Followed very closely by Bizzle. Look up Bizzle. 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 That's my brother.
My favorite Christian rapper was John the Baptist.
John the Baptist?
Yeah, just read his prose in rap style. It just works perfectly. Give it a shot.
What? I don't even heard of him. I got to look John the Baptist up. That's crazy.
So I literally just meant the gospel, John the Baptist.
You meant the actual? Bro, you're bugging. You're bugging. I thought this was the actual rapper. I was like, that's a crazy rap name.
So yeah, it is a great one. I love it. Question for Biscuit from Dream. Not all religions are equally evolutionarily advantageous. Islam, due to their birth rate and vigor, is currently the religion with the most utility. Why aren't you Muslim?
It's
So
currently the religion with the most utility. Why
I
aren't
think the
you?
question, because you're referencing the previous question where someone asked if, even if there is proved to be no God, would you still advocate for Christianity because of the benefits it has? And he's saying that the one that has the most benefits is Islam. So why don't you advocate for Islam?
Yeah, so I think they might be confusing the reason I'm a Christian for the reason I said Brett Weinstein said that religions are that religious people are more evolutionarily adaptive than non-religious people. So I think this would be a better question for maybe Brett Weinstein. But the reason that I'm a Christian is because I look at myself and I look at my experience and notice that I'm on the same journey as the writers of the Christian Bible. So I don't think that I'm very sympathetic to the idea that an authority is dictating to me how to live. If that were the case, why would that same authority give me a brain? So it wouldn't make sense that the creator of the universe would give me a brain which is capable of free thought and then not have me use it because everything I should do in life is dictated to me by something like the Quran.
All right, let's see. Question for Biscuit. Have you ever investigated the origins of the Bible stories?
Some of them, definitely not all of them. In this conversation with TJump, I talked about the Epic of Gilgamesh, and that was written about 1,000 years, about 1,000 years before Genesis, and that contained the flood. The I think one of the original flood myths. The tree of life is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the serpent deceives Gilgamesh and eats from the tree of life, and so a lot of those ideas are taken from the Bible or put in the Bible from ancient Mesopotamians. I know that a lot of the law was taken from the Babylonian Empire, and so yeah, there was definitely a lot of sharing in those ancient Bible stories for sure.
Frank says, try to get Biscuit to hook up his Discord.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna go on YouTube after this, and if you're on, I don't know how long you're gonna be on after you and I get off, but I'm gonna YouTube how to use Discord because I'm like, why is this so hard for me? I'm just stupid. That's what I'm just like. I don't know what it is, bro. I,
Are
I
you on
can't
right
get in
now?
there. I
I
can't
can
hear you. I
probably
can't hear other people.
invite people. Are you on right now, or do you have to use your phone for that? Mr. Biscuit, invite. I think I just sent you a DM on Discord.
Just send me a link.
Yeah, click on that, see if that works. It's probably going to freeze and go to that one, but that's fine.
Uh, it says Ham Daddy's channel.
Yep.
Discord. Yo, can you hear me?
I'll check the Discord.
It says
Testing. Simon, can you hear Biscuit talking on Discord? No,
can you hear me
Simon.
now?
Can you hear him now? No. So it's probably they're picking up. Your audio might be going to our website, Streamlabs Restream. So you might have to close that one to get it to work on Discord.
Okay, I'm gonna close this one right now.
All right. Then reset the default. Yes, Biscuit, we can hear you on Discord. All right. Yeah, you should be able to just join anyone you want and get it to work. The link was just to get you into the right room to test it.
Oh, perfect, perfect. Because this is the only one on Discord that I'm in, so maybe I should just, yeah, this is where I'll be.
Awesome. Then let's see, what time is it? 45. We got a few more minutes, a few more questions for you if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem. And TJump, welcome to the faith. Everybody in here, welcome to the faith.
Did we just join a cult?
Yes.
I was going to ask that right now.
I hate when that happens.
It'll go easier for you if you don't resist.
Hey,
You
I will
provide coffee. That's all I ask.
sufficient monies, and I will convert to anything, flat Earth, whatever.
TJump Soul is bought. All I need to do
Yes.
is save enough money and buy TJump Soul.
Yep.
It's all cash with me, bro.
Yep. Sugar
Yeah,
babies
but
are expensive.
question.
But CM Gold, Biscuit, is it possible that a creator exists but your religion is incorrect?
Absolutely. I think that, and here's the thing. It's like this is kind of what, in my estimation, the biblical writers are writing. The whole book of Lamentations is like, God, where are you? The book of Psalms, David is running from Saul and he's in a cave and he's like, God, where are you? Why have I been abandoned? Jesus, God, why have you forsaken me? John the Baptist denied Jesus. It seemed like he denied Jesus. Let me not say too much. But when John the Baptist got arrested, he said, Jesus, are you truly the Messiah or do we wait for another? This whole tradition is about aligning epistemology with ontology. So it's totally possible. And as a matter of fact, likely, it's very likely that what I believe about God is a tiny, tiny, tiny fragment of what the truth actually is about what God is like. Sorry to soapbox.
Searching for more questions. Anybody in the Discord have any questions?
A little off subject, but what does your hat say? Is that a map?
Picture of like a state?
I didn't hear that.
What's the picture on your hat?
Oh yeah, the picture on my hat is Washington State.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay.
Yeah, Northwest.
Does it says what, WA on the bottom there?
Yeah, it says WA.
Question from Geo. Biscuit, are you familiar with Bernardo Kastrup's formulation idealism? And if so, what do you think about it?
I love Bernardo Kastrup. Bernardo Kastrup has he did some research into people with dissociative identity disorder, and he believes that we are all dissociated identities within a single consciousness, which is fascinating. And he thinks that, our skin and our skulls represent dissociative boundaries, almost like avatars. And so I don't know whether or not I'm more sympathetic to that or Rupert Spira's concept of the dream, because I think that the dream makes a lot of sense too. If you think of, there's this fundamental consciousness that's spaceless and timeless. Because what Spira says that I think made a lot of sense is that if all of our consciousnesses are a part of a grand consciousness, we should expect our consciousness to behave in a similar way as the grand consciousness does. So when we fall asleep and we have a dream, we create avatars. So in my dream, I'll create an avatar that represents me. I create an avatar that looks like my wife if I'm dreaming about my wife. I'll create an avatar that looks like my daughter if I'm dreaming about her. And I create a space and a time with which to interact with them, none of which is real. All right. It's just all kind of a creation in the dreamer's mind. And so if space and time are not fundamental, which in my belief, they're not, then that's kind of what we're dealing with here. We're more or less in a dream state. And we're having a dissociated experience, which goes all the way back to what the Vedas and the Upanishads assumed about Brahman. There's a sleeping and a waking of Brahman, and we are in the sleeping phase where we have this illusion of being different individuals, one from another.
Thank you, Charles and Solo, for the super chat. So, do you believe that God came to Earth posing as his son? ? That as a God man, he was killed to somehow save us all from the rule that he made up, or how does it actually work?
Yeah, so you're going to hear a lot of different opinions, and I guess I shouldn't have said that because you asked for my opinion. So let me just give it. Jesus didn't claim to be God in the Gospel of Mark, which is the earliest gospel that we have. In later gospels, especially in the latest gospel, the Gospel of John, there's a lot of different God claims. But as a mystic, I believe that what Jesus was saying about himself, he expected us to say about ourselves too. One of my biggest gripes with Western Christianity today is that it's a religion about Jesus and not a religion of Jesus. I want to practice the religion of Jesus. So when Jesus says, I and the Father are one, we should say the same thing about ourselves. We should recognize that same thing. When Jesus says, he who has seen the Father has also seen me, we should say the same thing about ourselves. And this isn't even controversial in the biblical narrative. The Apostle Paul said, let this mind be in you that was also in Christ Jesus, who thought it not robbery to make himself equal with God. So we should be doing that same thing as Christians today. And I think that me and TJump had a good conversation about why the legacy of Christianity has altered from that. I think that the church was afraid of the encroachment of the scientific community in the modern era.
Awesome. I think that's all the questions I have for now. We've been going for about 2 hours. It was a great conversation. Enjoy to have you on as always, Biscuit. And I'm going to head off and get some food, and I'll talk to you guys later.
No doubt. Hey, thanks, TJump. Let's have another conversation again soon.
Absolutely.
All right, boss.
Peace out.